I never thought I'd be the guy telling this story. Growing up, I always believed that love conquers all, that commitment means something, and that when you marry someone, you're building something together that can weather any storm. At 22, deployed thousands of miles from home, I learned that sometimes the storms come. When I first met I was still a specialist in the army. She was 19, full of life, and everything seemed to click between us. We met during one of those rare peaceful periods in military life when you're not preparing for deployment, not in the field, and actually have time to build something real with another person. The connection was immediate and intense, the kind that makes you think you've found your person. Our relationship developed quickly, but not recklessly. We talked about everything, our dreams, our fears, what we wanted to build together. I was honest about my military career, about the deployments that would come, about the challenges we'd face. She seemed to understand, even embrace it. When I picked up Sergeant 5 months later, we both knew what it meant. The Army's regulations about fraternization are clear: officers and enlisted personnel can't date, and there are rules about relationships between different ranks. We had a 1-year timeline to either end things or get married. The deployment was already on the horizon. I could see it coming like a storm front moving across the plains of my career. We had a choice to make, and we chose each other. Looking back, I wonder if we were too young, too naive, or maybe just too caught up in the romance of it all. But at the time, it felt like destiny. I threw myself into preparing for our life together. I found us a house, not just any house, but one that felt like home. I spent weekends furniture shopping, trying to imagine what A would like, what would make her comfortable while I was gone. I wanted her to walk into our home and feel surrounded by love, even when I wasn't there. I bought furniture piece by piece, arranged it all, made sure everything was perfect. I gave her full access to everything: the car, the house, the bank accounts. I wanted her to feel secure, to know that even though I was leaving, I was still providing for her, still thinking about her every day. The wedding was beautiful but rushed. We had family there, but it was smaller than we'd originally planned. There's something bittersweet about getting married a month before deployment. You're starting your life together just as you're about to be separated. During our vows, I remember looking at her and thinking about all the young military couples who don't make it through deployments. I was determined we'd be different. Leaving for deployment is never easy, but leaving a new wife behind was particularly gut-wrenching. The morning I left, I cried, and I held her as long as I could. I promised I'd call every day, that I'd be home before she knew it, that our love was strong enough to handle anything. The confidence I felt in that moment was absolute. I was a soldier, trained to handle difficult situations, and I was a husband, committed to making our marriage work no matter what. The first few months overseas were exactly what I expected them to be. The work was demanding, the environment was challenging, but I had something to look forward to every day: our conversations. Due to the 8-hour time difference, I'd developed a routine. I'd text it when I woke up, knowing she'd see it hours later and respond when she woke up. Then we'd have our real conversation when she got home from work, which was usually my evening. It became the anchor of my day. A scene to be adjusting well. She talked about her job, her unit, the friends she was making. I was proud of how independent she was becoming, how she was handling the house, managing everything while I was gone. She'd send me pictures of home, little updates about her day, and I'd share what I could about mine. It felt like we were building something even across the distance. The military community on base was supportive too. Other married soldiers would share their experiences, offer advice, remind me that the hard part was temporary. I'd see guys who'd been through multiple deployments with their wives, who'd built strong marriages despite the challenges. They became my models for what was possible. But deployment changes you in ways you don't expect. The isolation, the constant alertness, the way time moves differently when you're far from home, it all affects how you process information, how you react to things. When you're deployed, everything back home takes on heightened significance. A casual comment from your spouse can keep you up all night analyzing what it might mean. You become hyper-aware of changes in communication patterns, in tone, in the stories that don't quite add up. The first sign something was wrong came in the form of an instant message. I'd sent her my usual morning text, not expecting a response for hours. But within minutes, she was responding. The time difference meant it was the middle of the night for her, which was unusual. When I asked why she was awake, her response was casual, almost dismissive. She was in a parking lot at a burger place at 1 a.m. with a guy from her squad. She mentioned his name, B, and explained that he'd had an accident with a generator at work. She'd driven him to the emergency room, and afterward, they'd decided to grab food and hang out rather than go home alone. She said she didn't feel safe being alone after the stress of the ER visit and that they'd been talking for hours. On the surface, it sounded innocent enough. Soldiers help each other out. When someone gets hurt, you take care of them. But something about the situation felt off. The timeline didn't make sense. If it was really just about helping a fellow soldier, why were they hanging out in a parking lot until the early morning hours when they both had formation in a few hours? Why hadn't she mentioned any of this earlier? Why did she seem so casual about spending the middle of the night with another man? I tried to push down my discomfort. I reminded myself that I was thousands of miles away, that I couldn't know the full context, that I needed to trust my wife. But the seed of doubt was planted. In the days that followed, I found myself analyzing every conversation, looking for signs, trying to read between the lines of her texts. The worst part was the isolation. When you're deployed, you can't just drive over to talk to your wife in person. You can't see her face, can't gauge her body language, can't have those important conversations that clear the air. You're stuck with whatever information you can gather through phone calls and text messages, and you're left to fill in the gaps with your own imagination. Over the next few weeks, B's name started appearing in A's conversations more frequently. She'd mention grabbing lunch with him, staying late at work because he needed help with something, or going to unit events where he happened to be. Each individual incident seemed innocent enough, but together they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. I tried to approach it carefully. I didn't want to be the jealous, controlling husband calling from overseas to interrogate his wife. But I also couldn't ignore what I was seeing. When I expressed my discomfort, A's responses were dismissive. She'd remind me that B was just a friend, that she was allowed to have friends, that I was being paranoid because of the deployment stress. Over the next few weeks, B's name started appearing in A's conversations more frequently. She'd mention grabbing lunch with him, staying late at work because he needed help with something, or going to unit events where he happened to be. Each individual incident seemed innocent enough, but together they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. I tried to approach it carefully. I didn't want to be the jealous, controlling husband calling from overseas to interrogate his wife. But I also couldn't ignore what I was seeing. When I expressed my discomfort, A's responses were dismissive. She'd remind me that B was just a friend, that she was allowed to have friends, that I was being paranoid because of the deployment stress. The gaslighting was subtle but effective. She'd turn my concerns back on me, making me question whether I was being reasonable. She'd point out that I was far away and couldn't understand the full context. She'd remind me that she'd never given me a reason not to trust her. Each conversation left me feeling more confused and more isolated. What made it worse was learning about B's reputation. Through conversations with other soldiers, I discovered that he wasn't well regarded in the unit. He had a history of inappropriate behavior, of pushing boundaries, of not respecting other people's relationships. His own wife was deployed at the same time as me, serving in a different location. The more I learned about him, the more concerned I became about A's association with him. But A either didn't see it or didn't care. When I tried to explain my concerns about B's character, she defended him. She said people were being unfair to him, that he was actually a good person who'd been misunderstood. She positioned herself as his defender, which only made me more uncomfortable. One of the most humiliating aspects of this entire situation was learning that other people had noticed A and B's behavior before I did. The military community is small and interconnected. People notice when someone's wife is spending too much time with another man, especially when both spouses are deployed. Word travels fast, and apparently, A and B had become a topic of conversation. Several people around the company started noticing their inappropriate behavior. These weren't jealous gossips or troublemakers, these were professional soldiers, including my close friends and leadership personnel. They were concerned enough to submit anonymous complaints to our first sergeant. The fact that multiple people felt compelled to report their behavior officially speaks to how obvious and inappropriate it had become. The most painful part was that my own friends were trying to protect me. They knew I was deployed, knew I was dealing with enough stress without having to worry about my wife's behavior. They hoped that handling it through official channels would resolve the situation without me having to know about it. But in a military unit, news travels, and eventually, the truth has a way of surfacing. When our company first sergeant received the complaints, he didn't immediately spring into action. Instead, he took time to observe the situation himself. This is the mark of good leadership, not reacting to gossip, but taking time to verify what's really happening. What he observed convinced him that action was necessary. A and B were counseled by their chain of command. I was moved to another platoon to separate them physically. They were both explicitly instructed to stay away from each other. This wasn't a suggestion or a gentle guidance, this was a military order. The fact that their leadership felt this was necessary should have been a wake-up call for A, but it wasn't. I only learned about the official intervention through a roundabout conversation. A's squad leader's husband called me to ask if I was friends with B. When I said no, he told me everything he knew. The conversation was awkward but necessary. Here was another soldier, trying to look out for a deployed colleague, sharing information that he felt I needed to know. What he told me lined up perfectly with the rumors I'd already been hearing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was devastating. It wasn't just that A was friends with B, it was that their behavior had been so inappropriate that it required official intervention. The fact that A never mentioned any of this to me was perhaps the most telling detail of all. She never said that people had complained about her behavior. She never mentioned being moved to another platoon. She never told me that she'd been counseled about her relationship with B. She never explained that they'd been ordered to stay away from each other. Instead, she continued to act as if nothing had happened, as if her friendship with B was perfectly normal and appropriate. She continued to deflect my concerns and make me feel like I was being unreasonable. The gap between what she was telling me and what was actually happening was becoming impossible to ignore. The situation escalated when I received a call from our property manager. There had been a red-orange BMW parked in my driveway while I was deployed. It had been there long enough for the HOA to complain that it was hanging into the sidewalk and posing a hazard. I drive a blue SUV, and it drives a gray sedan, so there was no mistaking whose car it was. B drove a red-orange BMW. When I asked A about it, her response was evasive. She didn't deny that his car had been there, but she didn't provide any real explanation either. She mumbled something about him dropping something off, but the details were vague and unconvincing. If it had been an innocent visit, Why wouldn't she have mentioned it? Why wouldn't she have a clear explanation? The thought of another man's car in my driveway while I was deployed, in the space where my own car should have been, was infuriating. It felt like a violation of our home, our sacred space. I'd worked so hard to create a home for us, and now it felt contaminated by his presence. But the evidence didn't stop there. Someone else in our company told me that his wife had seen B driving his BMW with a passenger who looked exactly like A. The description was specific: curly hair, glasses, same build. B's wife was deployed overseas, so who else would it be? Each piece of evidence felt like a punch to the gut. The car in the driveway, the eyewitness account, the official complaints, they all pointed to the same conclusion. But I still didn't have definitive proof, and part of me desperately wanted to be wrong. I had to make a choice: continue chasing every detail, every piece of evidence, every confirmation of what I already knew, or start focusing on what came next. The truth was clear enough. I had betrayed our marriage, violated the trust I'd placed in her, and shown a pattern of deception that was unlikely to change. One of the most important things I learned during this experience was the value of a strong support system. The military community, despite its flaws, provided a network of people who understood what I was going through. They'd seen other soldiers deal with similar situations, and they knew how to offer practical support. My friends didn't just offer sympathy, they offered solutions. They helped me understand my legal options, connected me with resources, and provided emotional support when I needed it most. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had value beyond my marriage, that I would get through this. The chaplain was particularly helpful. He provided a safe space to talk through my feelings without judgment. He helped me understand that it was okay to be angry, to feel betrayed, to question everything. He also helped me start thinking about forgiveness, not for A's sake, but for my own. My military leaders were also supportive. They understood that personal problems could affect job performance, and they worked with me to ensure I could fulfill my duties while dealing with the situation. They made it clear that they valued me as a soldier and as a person, regardless of what was happening in my marriage. Eventually, I reached a point where I had to decide what to do with the information I'd gathered. I could continue collecting evidence, building a case, preparing for a confrontation. Or I could accept what I knew and start planning my next steps. The decision wasn't easy. Part of me wanted definitive proof, a confession, a clear acknowledgement of what had happened. But I realized that I might never get that satisfaction. I had shown a pattern of deception and deflection that was unlikely to change just because I'd gathered more evidence. I also realized that my energy was better spent on planning my future than on documenting my past. The marriage was over, regardless of the specific details of what had happened. The trust was broken, the foundation was cracked, and no amount of evidence would change that. Making the decision to end the marriage was both difficult and liberating. It was difficult because it meant acknowledging that my dreams for our future were over. It was liberating because it meant I could stop living in limbo, stop wondering what was true, stop trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. The legal process was complicated by the deployment. I couldn't just walk into a lawyer's office or have face-to-face meetings with A. Everything had to be handled through phone calls, emails, and video conferences. But I was determined to handle it properly, to protect myself legally and financially. The infidelity clause in the prenup, which I had been so reluctant to provide, became relevant to the proceedings. Even though she'd claimed it might not be enforceable, the evidence of her behavior was clear enough to support my case. The very document she'd proposed as a symbol of our commitment became a tool for ending it. This experience taught me several important lessons about relationships, trust, and personal resilience. First, actions speak louder than words. I could tell me she loved me, that she was committed to our marriage, that I was being paranoid, but her behavior told a different story. When someone's words and actions don't align, believe the actions. Second, trust is earned through consistency over time. A single incident might be explained away, but a pattern of behavior reveals character. A's pattern of deception, boundary violation, and dishonesty showed me who she really was. Third, gaslighting is a powerful tool of manipulation. A's attempts to make me question my own perceptions were subtle but effective. She made me doubt my instincts, my judgment, my right to be concerned about obvious red flags. Learning to trust my own perceptions again was crucial to my healing. Fourth, the importance of community cannot be overstated. The military family that surrounded me during this difficult time provided support, information, and perspective that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had value, that I would survive this. Healing from betrayal is a long process, and it's not linear. There are good days and bad days, moments of clarity and moments of confusion. But gradually, I started to rebuild my sense of self, my confidence, my ability to trust my own judgment. One of the most important steps was accepting that I couldn't control A's behavior, I could only control my response to it. I couldn't make her be honest, faithful, or committed. I couldn't change what had happened. But I could choose how to move forward. I also had to forgive myself for the things I felt I'd done wrong. I blamed myself for deploying, for trusting too much, for not seeing the signs earlier. But I learned that self-blame was just another form of self-harm. I'd acted with integrity, with love, with commitment. The fact that I hadn't done the same wasn't my fault. This experience changed how I think about relationships, marriage, and trust. I'm more cautious now, more aware of red flags, more willing to trust my instincts. But I'm also more appreciative of genuine connection, honest communication, and mutual respect. I've learned that not everyone is capable of the kind of commitment that marriage requires. Some people are too immature, too selfish, or too damaged to be faithful partners. That's not a reflection on everyone, it's a reflection on them. I've also learned that surviving betrayal can make you stronger, more resilient, more capable of handling difficult situations. The experience was devastating, but it also taught me that I could survive devastation. That's a valuable lesson for anyone in the military, where resilience is often the difference between success and failure. For anyone going through a similar situation, my advice is this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting your own perceptions. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having reasonable expectations of fidelity and honesty. Gather your support system. Don't try to handle this alone. Reach out to friends, family, military resources, counselors, chaplains. There are people who understand what you're going through and want to help. Document everything, but don't obsess over it. Keep records of conversations, incidents, and evidence, but don't let the investigation consume your life. At some point, you have to accept what you know and move forward. Take care of yourself. This kind of situation can be physically and emotionally exhausting. Make sure you're eating, sleeping, exercising, and taking care of your basic needs. You can't make good decisions if you're not taking care of yourself. I'm still deployed as I write this, still dealing with the legal and emotional aftermath of this situation. But I'm also planning for the future. I'm thinking about what I want my life to look like when I get home, what kind of relationships I want to build, what kind of person I want to be. I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned, even though they came at a high cost. I'm grateful for the people who supported me through this difficult time. I'm grateful for the strength I've discovered in myself, the resilience I didn't know I had. Most importantly, I'm grateful for the truth. As painful as it was to learn what I was really doing, it was better than living a lie. The truth set me free to make real decisions about my life, to build something authentic and meaningful. This story isn't over yet. I'm still deployed, still processing, still healing. But I wanted to share it because I know other people are going through similar experiences. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not being too sensitive or too demanding. People who have nothing to hide don't act like they're hiding something. Silence and deflection often say more than words ever could. Trust your instincts, gather your support system, and remember that you deserve honesty, fidelity, and respect. The betrayal was devastating, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I'm writing that new chapter now, with the hard-won wisdom of experience and the support of people who truly care about me. That's worth more than any marriage built on lies.